people's livelihoods are being destroyed, businesses are being burned down, no problem.
Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
And then we have a dust-up at the Capitol. Well, there's nothing burned down. And we're not going to talk about, we're going to make that a major deal. I just think it kind of two standards. And if we apply the same standard, and we're going to be reasonable with each other, let's have a discussion. That's all it was.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, I am your humble host, Jazz Broganzo. What's next? Weekend edition. And we're going to go to sports with this one. And sadly, just like anything else, the cancer that is wokeness has afflicted sports in many, many, many ways, as we've seen in the last few years with, of course, the NBA, Black Lives Matter, and, of course, those wonderful, peaceful protests. Oh, speaking of those wonderful, peaceful protests, one former NFL coach, now defensive coordinator, Jack Del Rio, was asked a simple question. And unfortunately, the woke mob came for him. Let's take a look. This comes out of Outkick. This is a story prior. Jack Del Rio fined $100,000 for comments on January 6th and, of course, St. George Kirby. The Redskins issue ridiculous statement. It's an embarrassing moment for the NFL. The Washington Redskins announced today that they are fining defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio $100,000 for comparing the events of January 6th. Yes, those dangerous, deadly January 6th riots, to the violence that erupted after the death of the vaunted St. George Kirby. Let's bow our heads. The announcement was immediately applauded by NFL reporters desperately to be first to publicly proclaim their allegiance. Yes, check off those boxes to correct set of opinions. This is Ian Rappaport of the NFL, of ESPN, excuse me. Coach Ron Rivera has fined defense coordinator Jack Del Rio $100,000 for his troublesome and wrong comments. Troublesome and wrong comments. Significant. This comes out of statement from head coach Ron Rivera. This morning I met with Coach Del Rio to express my disappointment in how his comments on Wednesday. His comments do not reflect the organization's views and are extremely hurtful to the great community here in the Redskins organization. As we saw last night in the hearings, what happened on the Capitol on January 6th was an act of domestic terrorism. Yes, breaking and entering. Yes, that's domestic terrorism. A group of citizens attempted to overturn the results of a free and fair election. Yeah, okay. And a result, lives were lost. Yeah, about those. And Capitol building was damaged. Not really. Coach Del Rio apologized for his comments on Wednesday, and he did understand his distinction. We'll get into the so-called apology between the events of that dark day and peaceful protests. Wow. Which are a hallmark of our democracy. He does have the right to voice his opinion as a citizen of the United States, and it most certainly is his constitutional right to do so. However, words have consequences, and his words hurt a lot of people in the community. I want to make sure and make it clear that our organization will not tolerate any equivalency between those who demanded justice in the wake of St. George Kirby's passing, bow your heads, and the actions of those on January 6th who sought to topple our government. I could end it right there. The stupidity, the sheer ignorance of this comment reaches levels, but let's go on. Rappaport displays a key function of modern activism disguised as reporting. Instead of expressing skepticism or scrutiny, sports writers approach each topic with underlying assumptions their opinions arguably constitute the only acceptable set of beliefs. Yes, their opinions actually mean something. Del Rio's comments were troublesome and wrong, and therefore he deserves significant response. Rappaport and others like him have approached this issue with nuance and objectivity, but this is simply the latest example of media personalities committed to maintain unblemished allegiance to whatever the current thing demands. So what did Jack Del Rio say to justify such an extreme punishment? Well, quote, People's livelihoods are being destroyed. Businesses are being burned down, no problem. And then we have a dust up at the Capitol, nothing burned down, and we're going to make that a major deal. I just think it's a kind of two standards. We'll get into that a little bit later. Ironically, the statement released by the Redskins and head coach Ron Rivera essentially proves Del Rio's point. Rivera and the Commanders say they just will not tolerate equivalency between those who demanded justice of St. George Kirby, bow your heads, and the actions of those on January 6 who sought to topple our government. They completely ignore the violence, destruction, and lives lost during the rioting of the summer of 2020. Yes, you know, the lovely summer of love. Instead of implying Del Rio's compared January 6th with, quote, peaceful protest. Except he did the opposite. He specifically referred to businesses and livelihoods that were destroyed, not those peacefully marching and carrying signs. He's right. An estimated rioting in 2020 would cost up to $2 billion. Turns out to be $5 billion worth of damage. But numbers aside, the most expensive damage in insurance history. The George Kirby riots and the Rivera called for demand justice included the death of 25 people. False, $2 billion of damage. False, justice and peaceful, you say. In response to this misleading and clearly written for Rivera press release, Outkick contacted the Washington Redskins for a series of questions. We asked the following. Did Ron Rivera write this statement? If he did not, who did? Why compare to January 6th, quote unquote, to peaceful protest when Del Rio specified he was referring to the Black Lives Matter riots and, of course, Antifa were far more deadly than the storming of the Capitol? Does his team consider looting and murdering, both of which occurred during the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020, peaceful? Does Del Rio have free speech rights? We know the answer to the final question is no, but we asked anyway, mostly for shits and giggles. Now let's get to the so-called apology. This comes out of TMZ. Coach Del Rio, sorry I called January 6th a dust-up, irresponsible, and negligent. I made the comments earlier today in referencing to the attack that took place on the United States Capitol January 6th of 21, referencing that the situation was a dust-up, was irresponsible, and negligent, and I'm sorry. I stand by my comments condemning violence in communities across the country, and I say that while expressing my support as an American citizen for peaceful protests in our country. I have fully supported the peaceful protests in America. I love, respect, and support all my fellow coaches, players, and staff that work with and respect their views and opinions. The one thing that I pulled out of that was I stand by my comments, quote unquote, one Jack Del Rio. Now, Jack Del Rio was 1,000% correct in regards to comparing the lovely and wonderful peaceful protest of 2020, $5 billion worth of damages, businesses destroyed, residents upended, cops shot, cops killed, and of course, the most famous of that whole situation was, of course, Kyle Rittenhouse, who was put on trial for murder when really he was defending himself as a citizen of the United States regarding the Second Amendment. For Ron Rivera to put out such a bullshit and garbage-laced statement in reasoning why, yes, virtue signaling, political correctness, wokeness, check off all the boxes, and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, Coach Del Rio was right. There were people who got killed, including one innocent woman, Ashley Babbitt, unarmed, shot to death by Capitol D.C. police. But no, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the so-called police that were actually killed, including one who was supposedly bashed in the head with a fire extinguisher when it turned out that he died from a stroke at the base of the brain. The others who died were protesters. There were no cops killed. There were no 25 supposedly killed. There weren't. Sorry. I tip my hat to you, Jack Del Rio, because you were right. And of course, the leftist media trash is wrong as always. And with that being said, I'm Jasper Gonzo. This is What's Next. Like it, share it, subscribe to it. And we'll catch you guys again on the next one. Peace.